Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenniger. Welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. And my guest today is John Granholm, a Yank living in the UK. And I want to find out how all that happened and what is the what is the benefit of living there? What do you love about living there? And tell us a little bit about who you are, John, and how you ended up there, and the things that you love about where you live.
Such a wonderful question, and Ed, thank you very much for having me on the show.
A pleasure.
and for taking the time to record this conversation. Right, I love it. I think to get to where we are now, it always requires a little bit of history, and that is, while I will say I have absolutely loved my time here in the United Kingdom since the first month of 2007. We won't do the maths, as we say over here, but it's been a few years now. And although my two daughters, who at that point were not quite 6 and not quite 3 years old, right? My two daughters, in relative cases, right now, 22 and 19 years old, the one who was not quite 3 pretty much sounds British now, right? She drinks I actually I'm having coffee here while I chat with my friend Ed, but I also have a big old jug of, as my older daughter Kate would say, water, but as my younger daughter would say, water.
Water.
Right?
Yeah.
Water. But I mean, how about that though? So they got it, right? Now my older daughter, who still has American vowels, she's been here for the same number of years, but she still has American vowels, so she still sounds American. I will say her diction is a lot cleaner than sort of average American diction, right? Her consonants are clearer, her fricatives are a little bit clearer, but she still sounds completely American. And how hilarious is that she was 5 3/4 years old when she got here, but somehow, so for all of you cognitive psychologists out there, right, you are absolutely right? Some of our identity is formed in the first 5 or 6 years, right? It's done. But my daughter, who wasn't quite 3, she's like, and they have the same parents. They have absolutely the same friends, right? Same friend group, right? But so I love the UK, and I'll tell you all about that. But at the same time, I grew up in a tiny little town in South Dakota, which I have to think is probably pretty uncommon for your Eddie Network guests as well. And it was a fairly idyllic childhood, right? It's a university town. Thank you, Dad, who's a retired professor now. So the population of our town was less than 20,000 when school wasn't in session, but when SDSU came into session, now it's 30,000 plus, right? So what was really nice about that is that you had and we were the county seat, or the county seat of Brookings County. What was really nice about that, though, is although perhaps the orchestra wasn't a world-class orchestra, and God forbid, my parents would actually take us to university orchestra concert, and we'd go, no, please, not a more orchestra, right? But you had real Broadway musicals, and you had, I could tell you one of the high points of my childhood growing up was James Doohan, for the nerds in the audience, Scotty of the Enterprise. Scotty came and talked to the South Dakota State University Engineering Society, and let me tell you, my dad made sure that he had 4 seats. Bless her, Mom did not want to come along, but Dad and his 3 sons were there watching Scotty talk about Star Trek, right? And I'm not sure James Doohan was happy with his agent for sending him to Brookings, South Dakota for a night, but it was this wonderful mix between all of the culture and the civilization that you get with the university, and at the same time, this was a town where in the summers, my mom, we walked to school every day, right? Super safe, right? Too safe, in fact. One of the great stories of my childhood is we were walking home. It snows a lot in South Dakota. People know this, right? We were walking home in deep, deep snow from, I think it was even elementary school, and a police car drove by, probably a police car who's just checking to make sure that people aren't stuck in the snow, right? Because that's what they do in South Dakota. And somebody had the idea, why don't we throw a snowball at the police car?
Bad idea.
So whoever was in that squad car, I'm so sorry, but so we whack it in the back with a snowball. Again, I think probably some of my friends did after I did, and of course they turn around and come driving around the road straight at us, and we think, oh, not such a good idea. So I have never run so fast or cleared so many. I was probably 10 years old, 11. I've never cleared so many backyard fences, tall 4, 5, 6 feet fences, because I was like, I'm going to jail. I'm going to go to jail, right? They didn't catch us, which would sound like bragging, but I got to tell you, I don't think they ever even got out of the car, right? Why would they? You know, right? But so
They knew it was
such a
a bunch
safe
of
little,
kids. They knew it was a bunch
yeah,
of.
yeah, but such a safe little town that in the summers, my mom would say, "Okay, look, I don't want to have you in my hair. Dinner's at 6:30. Just go." And we'd have the run. We'd get on our bikes, and and it was pretty easy. The town's only like sort of 2 miles on a side, so you could easily get from town to wilderness. Although in South Dakota, wilderness is mostly cornfields. Right?
Well, I think you'll find it interesting that since early September, I've been out here in Wyoming, up here in northern Wyoming. I'm in Cody, and we've already had a snow this year, and that 2 weeks ago, and that was fun. It was, it was nice to have to bundle up. One morning, it was 5 degrees, which I think is, um, uh, oh, I think it is close to like eight 8 degrees Celsius or something. So it's
Oh,
really.
even Celsius 0 is 32, so five is almost -9. It's like -8 or
Oh,
9.
okay, -9.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so that's right. That's right. That's right. And so it was nice to get out and drive on snow-covered roads, and
How much do you have to shovel? Did you have to shovel a lot?
I swept the walk.
Okay.
I'm renting a house here, and I swept the walk, and that's all I've had to do. And I swept the snow off the car, and that's all I had to do. But
It's it's funny, isn't it? It's funny. Like I have actually have, I don't want to, of course, no one's, never trust anyone who says they enjoyed high school or anything, but I did have a really, like, I think back to shoveling snow with my dad. And, and I had two brothers too. It wasn't just me. We shared the work equivalent.
right,
Mom was cooking dinner. That was kind of the division of labor. But so we lived on a corner plot, like we were on a corner of a block. So we just didn't have the sidewalk in front of our house. We had the sidewalk all the way up the north side. And let me tell you, that north side gets a lot of snow.
yeah,
Gets a lot of snow, north wind coming in. And so I just remember we'd go out and shovel, and it'd be wet, sometimes wet, heavy snow. But it just shared projects, right? Shared purpose, shared project, right? And you knew like it gets tiring after a while because it keeps snowing, right? So you have to shovel, and you have to shovel the next day, and you have to shovel 2 days later. But I don't know. But I just want to say it's not like I had a lot to argue against in the U.S. But when it was offered to me as a sort of a U.S. large cap growth portfolio manager, my career is wide and varied, which is probably worth mentioning to anybody who's questing, who's wondering, like, what do I do? Do I have to have the right job, right? I don't have the answer to that question, but I've never known if I had the right job, and I'm actually quite hopeful now, here at the grand old age of 53, that maybe I'm kind of falling into it. I might be coming to it now, but I had for the first 10 years of my career, on average, I probably had a job every year, a different job every year, and let me tell you, sir, it was nothing like that regular. It wasn't like it was like, oh, like it's February again, I better change jobs, right? I mean, lots of zigs und zags,
yeah,
through that.
yeah.
But I ended up in portfolio management. It was a great job. But and when it was offered to me, they say, hey, one of your old mentor from Minneapolis, who had been a global portfolio manager in London. I don't know if we talk about the names of our firms, but he was retiring. And curiously, I didn't plan this, but he was retiring. Like, oh God, who are we going to get to fill in for Dan? And they said, oh, John Granholm, let's get John. And part of the connection was both of us, smart guys, kind of, easy to talk to, easy, good at listening, good at asking questions. But interestingly enough, Dan grew up in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I
Oh
grew
no,
up
is
on the
that
other
right?
side of the state. So I think they just said, we need another South Dakotan. We need another South Dakotan in London. That's what we need. But think about it. The offer was, we'll move you over to London, and it's good to be an expatriate because we'll help give you rent support, we'll pay for your kids' education, anything else. So I was well compensated already, and then I got even better compensated to move to London. And I said to my wife, my then wife, those earlier, my wife at the time, but I said, do you want to live in Europe? Do you want to live in Europe for a while? Right? It's only a 3-year term. We can always come back, but we'll get all of the cross cultural experience, and our girls will be international citizens. And let me tell you, that was not a long discussion. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
right.
Sounds
So
like a perfect scenario.
yeah, yeah, and it really worked out like that. In fact, it worked out so well that after about 2 years with my American firm, because the expat contracts were really three years long, and then they were either move me back, and I am a Midwesterner, so I was working in Minneapolis on the large cap growth team until then. And I have to say, I was not excited about moving back to New York. My firm was based in New York, and so I didn't want to go back to the snake pit, politics, corporate politics central. And so after about 2 years, when a friend told me, um, this company's looking for a new senior portfolio manager, right? They're going to be calling you. And I said, I don't take headhunter calls, right? That's just not my thing. And he said, take this one, take this one, right? And so I did. And that firm then hired me, and I worked there for another decade, from
Mhm.
2009 to 2018. And it was then and I did that honestly because we liked it over here so much. My girls had friends, we had friends, right? We enjoyed, I never actually skied until I got to Europe, and we enjoyed, flying over to France to ski. Like, how fun is that? How fun is that? It's better skiing than is in South Dakota. Any South Dakotans listening will not be offended, because although we do have ski slopes, Terry Peak, and I forget what the other one is called, the Black Hills are the foothills of the Rockies. It's not so much. It's not
Yeah.
so much, right?
Yeah.
A lot of ice.
So let me ask you this question. So you've been portfolio manager for many years. You've been dealing with the financial world all those years. So what was it like for you to go through the recession of the late 2000s? What was that experience like? And I'm putting that in the context of, say, the films that people would have watched, like The Big Short and The Wolf of Wall Street, those kinds of films where, they have dramatized that experience. I really like The Big Short. Thought it was not only a great book, but a great movie. They're very different. So you loved it.
I love The Big Short. I love Michael Lewis, right? I love everything from Liar's Poker to Moneyball to the new thing. I am told, I haven't read his latest book yet on Sam Bankman-Fried and what happened there, but I'm told that Michael Lewis is very close to being canceled, if he hasn't already been canceled, because he lost his objectivity with SBF, and couldn't say that it was a fraud. He couldn't say that the whole thing was a fraud, right? He thinks SBF has some vision, and anything else. The guy's going to jail. I don't know. I wasn't there, right? But Michael Lewis was so captivated that, in 500 pages of the book, I think he uses the word fraud once, and it's, but yeah, The Big Short's fantastic. And what I can tell you is, I was actually, I'm not a, I didn't, I, I'm an equity guy, right? So it's just the boring old, stocks and companies that everybody knows, whether it's, Anheuser-Busch InBev or Procter and Gamble or Cisco or
Yeah.
Intel or, General Electric, right? But so I wasn't trading, CMOs or, or credit default swaps. But my firm at the time was hugely exposed to, in terms of owning the equities of companies that everybody on this call will know, or, well, I don't know, like let's say, Bear Stearns. Like, we were one of the biggest owners of Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns. So I can tell you
A lot of
that
exposure.
as a client facing portfolio manager whose job it is to, to both inspire confidence, but also, I'm to communicate. My job is to communicate. What are we doing? What's our strategy? How are we addressing? How does that strategy addressing current market conditions? And in the global financial crisis, the current market conditions were, apocalyptic, right? So, and we were owning some of the biggest stinkers, right? And we're a growth stock. Like, wait a second, how is a growth stock investor owning something like a Lehman Brothers? And the reason that we could is that for a long time, these financial companies were growth stocks, right? They did. They grew. They grew their earnings per share grew not just 12, but 13, 14, 15% per annum. Nobody should be able to grow 15% per annum, right? It's pretty impressive when a tech company does that, right? When a startup does that. But they were able to do it because we don't necessarily need to go into too many details, but they were able to do it because of the shenanigans that they were getting up to, right? So my job was a really hard one in that year, in the year of 2008, because I was trying to explain to our clients, first, don't panic, right? Don't panic in general, because panic, never does anything, never helps to run in circles, scream and shout, right? But the other one was don't panic in general, but also don't panic about us. We really are not as stupid or incompetent or perhaps even malicious as we seem to be by owning all these companies, which were wonderful earners for so many years. And then, as our friend Warren Buffett will tell you, right? You never know who's swimming without their bathing suit on until the tide goes out, right? And the tide went out. The tide went out really hard in 2008, and we looked fairly foolish. So my experience as a purveyor of both information and confidence, right, was a pretty tough one, because it's hard to be confident when the whole world is crashing around you, and it's also hard to be confident when it seemed that all of my friends and colleagues, right, all the people, the analysts and the portfolio managers that I'm working with, like it didn't feel like we could shoot our way out of a paper bag.
So. There are two things that that have stayed with me in that whole period of time. It took about a year for that set of problems to hit me, but in the summer of 2009, I lost all my clients in about 6 weeks. And and one of them was going to be the largest project I'd ever done, and so just went away just like that. And it was the end of the end of my consulting business. I mean, I had some more clients coming forward, but it was really clear that it was never going to return to what it was. And it was because of this second thing, which was the mindset I saw emerging from that, which was, we're going to pull back, we're going to be conservative, and wait for this thing to run its course, and then we'll be back to normal, and we can go ahead and do what we've always done. And my sense was, that's not going to happen. This is a game changer of the first magnitude, and we will be in a different place, at least for the rest of my life. And I think we're still in that place. Still, a lot of people playing games with their minds and not thinking clearly about what's going on, and governments doing the same thing. I mean, it's really remarkable to look at how supposedly smart people live in such a fantasy world when it comes to things like money.
Yes. Yeah. And I really appreciate what you're saying about, we just have to wait for things to go back to normal, right? Because let's explore this. Let's dig into this.
Yeah.
I don't have the answer, right? I don't have the answer. What that says, though, right? It's actually, right, we're going to get a little metaphysical here, right? Yeah. Spoiler alert, noetic conversation coming. The actual analysis, the fact of whether or not things are going to go back to normal or not, actually hardly matters at all, because it's the attitude, it's the fear that attends the waiting. I'm going to wait for things to go back to normal. It doesn't, how to say this? I'm going to take a huge segue, which is, and now we're not going to talk about politics. We're going to talk about relationships, right? Yeah. If you believe your spouse is cheating on you, you will find evidence of your spouse cheating. You'll find it. Doesn't really matter, right?
Whether it's true or not.
Doesn't matter. You'll find the evidence. And that works exactly the other way, right? If you know your spouse is never going to cheat on you, they can be showing you all the receipts from all the hotel visits that where they've been having their assignations, right? But you go, well, but I know he'd never do that, right? You won't see it. And it's the same thing. If my stance is, something really bad happened, and I'm going to wait until that bad thing is over before I can go back to normal, before I can resume the normal programming, right? It will never happen, because my radar is twigged to everything that's showing me what the bad stuff that's happening. Now, I said I didn't have any answers, and that was absolutely true. But I do think that there's the seed of an answer in there, which is, mindset matters more than the fact pattern on the ground, right? There are different fact patterns. There are times in history when times are better, worse, obviously, right? We can be more bestial or less bestial to our neighbors, right? We can be kinder, we can be less kind. But
would
mindset.
Would you say that again? That little phrase that you did, just that
the mindset part.
Mindset
yeah. I think I mean, I don't think this is new to me, but I don't know that I've used these words before, but I believe that mindset matters more than the specific set of facts on the ground, right? And I am paraphrasing and obviously just doing horrible work to the words of people like Viktor Frankl or Elie Wiesel, or when I'm doing this, right? We don't choose our circumstances, but we certainly choose our response to our circumstances.
Yeah,
right. But I do, and the reason this is so profound, the reason this is so profound for me, right, is that like I'm only grappling with this myself, in the last 4 and 5 years since I got off the treadmill, not the portfolio management treadmill, although I got off that too, but since I got off the treadmill, as our good friend Brene Brown would describe it, of hustling for worth, right? Of trying to somehow to prove my worth, to prove my goodness. She again says it much better, but she says if you're hustling for your self-worth, you're never going to get it, right? But I will say that's right back to mindset, which is because the hustling for it, the reaching, can I get to the next rung on the the Brits have this wonderful phrase they call it the greasy pole, right? Can we just get up the greasy pole, right? But for me, it was always, and because I think I'm so smart, it wasn't that can I just get to the next rung. It was like, oh no, I can jump to the third or the fourth or the fifth rung. But at some point on that ladder, there's going to be the rung of good enough. There's going to be the rung of good enough, and once I get to that one, then I can rest and everything's okay. And then it's the whole idea, right? And I hate to lapse into the banality of cliche, right? But the whole idea is the antithesis of, I forget what they call it. It's Strictly Come Dancing here. What is it? Oh, it's Dancing with the Stars in the U.S., right? The ballroom show. What they say, it's everybody's Dancing with the Stars journey, right? We're on my Strictly journey, right? And that language just kills me. But it is exactly correct. It's the belief that life isn't a journey, that life is about the destination. It's if we can just get to that magical destination, then everything will be okay. That is the same thinking that you just described in your clients in 2009 when they said, Ed, we'd really love to do this consulting project, but we're going to wait until things get back to normal. That back to normal spot is the island where it all worked out. We can just get to the island where it all worked out.
It is really, that's a really interesting thing that we're discussing, because and this is something that has been popping up in things that I've been reading and hearing over the last week or 10 days, which has to do with this sense of that things should be stable and fixed. And they rarely are, but somehow people feel like everything should be unmoving. And okay, this is where we are and this is where we're going to be. But that's not really ever the case. It's always in transition, always in
flux.
Yeah.
Right. And I think this is I don't know how much to disclose or not disclose, right? But I am so fortunate that that I had the ability, although I did do consulting and coaching, right? I haven't just been playing tennis and online bridge. I've been playing a good amount of tennis and online bridge, I will be honest with you. But I've also been watching my former marriage end in just a horrible fashion, and then happily, not even a year later, falling in love, right? And now being engaged to a wonderful partner, right? And the only reason she's not buzzing around in the kitchen behind us is that she's off she's off. I have these two daughters that I talked about earlier. She's off gallivanting around North America because although she has four wonderful girls, they all had the gall to live in completely different cities across the US and Canada, and nowhere near, no daughter lives anywhere near any of the other three daughters, right? I'm like, come on,
Yeah.
guys, come on. But I'm so lucky. Now I have six. Now I've got six daughters, right? I mean, but I was so fortunate to be able to have both the financial resources as well as, the support of friends and family, and even myself. Like, I was okay to say, John, it's all right. Like, it's all right if you're not a master of the universe, it's okay for a few years, right? And you know what? It's okay if you're never a master of the universe, right? But I've done a lot of work. I've sat on the couch. I've been on my therapist's couch a lot, right? And the question is, right, when we think about, can we just get it to a place where everything's okay? Can we get to a place, as you were saying, where everything's stable and certain, right? That's mythical. Just agreeing with my friend Ed. It's mythical, but it's not only mythical, it's also pretty destructive, because the thing that is stable and certain, if it's certain, it's because we know it. Like, we know it. We have certainty, right? It's past. It's happened in the past. It's not a future thing. It's not even a present thing. It's not something that's unfolding in the present. It has to be past. We're hearkening, and we're really trying to grab really hard, like clinging in to that past thing to hold on to it. It's not just that it's a myth. It's that it's quite destructive, because the thing we know is, unless we're already profoundly psychologically healthy and well and everything, the thing that we know is less good than the thing that we're going to.
Mhm.
The thing that's in the future, as we grow, as we learn, as we allow ourselves to talk to friends, to have open-ended questions, to have conversations with friends, like conversations like you and I have had, Ed, that we don't know what the end of that conversation is, right? I do not call my friend Ed Brenniger so that he can tell me things I already know.
Yeah. That's, yeah, I totally see that and totally agree with you. And the way I look at that, and this is just coming to me as you were describing this, it's that life is more like um, a long backpacking journey where we only have enough space in our knapsack to carry the essentials, and we have to leave behind a lot of the things that we really like, but really are problems for carrying them along. I came across a video, I think it was on Instagram the other day, of these two young guys who decided that they were going to walk from Copenhagen. I think it was Copenhagen. No, it was Amsterdam to Istanbul, and
Oh, oh,
and
how
it took
wonderful.
them, I think, 3 or 4 months to do it. And in this little video, they were talking about how they took a detour and they hiked down the islands on the Adriatic coast of Croatia,
Mm,
and
mm.
all the things that they, and it reminded me of a man who did this back in the 20s. I think it was in the 20s. I mean, Patrick Lee Fermor. My
I
son
know the name. I've heard the
introduced me to
name.
it, and he did something similar. And he wrote 2 or 3 books about crossing across Europe on foot back in before the Second World War, and he ended up back in Britain, in the U.S., in the British military, and serving in Greece, and kind of organizing the Greek resistance to the Nazis.
Okay, okay.
It's a tremendous story of this man, and he lived to 94, and but these two boys, these two young kids, walking across Europe in the same way. I thought that was it. But I think the metaphor there is we need to be walking with only the essentials. And I think, to me, the essentials are really what is it that we value? What are our values?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, So,
And I'll lay into this, because if we I don't need to talk about what I'm doing right now, although I'll love to do it. But what are our values, and how do we know what our values are? Because I think a lot of that, the folks I'm working with, like John Morley and Martin Knox. I'm not sure if you got to meet Martin yet, or but the
yeah,
question is always going to be, what do you want? What do you want to, the Oprah Winfrey question, right? What do you want to have happen? What do you want to have happen? Which can be summed up in one little 3-syllable word, which is your intention. What are your intentions, right? And there are no good intentions. There are no bad intentions, right? We don't have to talk about the road to hell being paved with any intentions. But unless I know what my intentions are, and so you and I, if we're going to go on a journey together to the Adriatic or anywhere else, unless I know what my intentions are, so I can ask you what your intentions are, so we can do a little mapping. We can do some intention mapping. Where do eds fit, and how much is there overlap, and anything else, and
yeah,
then we can say, I don't think there's quite enough overlap. Maybe we shouldn't do this trip. Or with you and me, I'm going to go out on a limb. Like, I think there's probably a lot of overlap, right? I think
yeah,
I think we could travel well together, right? But that, what do we value? And I think, here again, I'm going to get kind of, gnomic philosopher on you, right? Because what do we value? It's not. I think it's kind of back to that. Let's not hold on so tight. Let's not claw in to the things that we know we're certain of, or that we know that we love, right? What we want, it's always about. It's not about what's the next thing, because if you start doing the next thing, then you're back on the treadmill. You're back on. Can I just climb? Can I climb the rungs? But it is how how you know I've lost my thread a little bit, but that's okay, because I never had it. But we don't want to, like you said, we don't want to shove everything into our knapsack. And in fact, we want to have a knapsack that can hold all manner of different things, but it has to hold all manner of different things, because it can't hold them all, right? So you go, okay, this was wonderful, and now I'm going to let that go, because
yeah,
that experience, that thing, my value could be the same, my intention could be the same. My intention is, I want to learn more, I want to be of more service, right? I want to love and be loved more. I want to find more people, or love the people that I have. I want to love them better and deeper, right? But better and deeper means, however I loved Vicky 2 weeks ago or 2 years ago, right? That's great, and that will always be great, but it probably won't be the way that I love her 2 weeks from now,
that's right.
or 2 years from now. But I'll never love her in that different, more transcendent, more. I'm getting to like Ken Wilber, transcend and include, right? I'll never love her in that more fully human way, unless I can let go of the way that I love her now.
Well, that really speaks to the part of the problem I find in relationships is that we establish the relationship and we feel like it has to stay there. And this particularly is true in marriage. And we're not equipped very well. It's a mindset, I think, to allow our spouse to change and we to change at the same time. And the trick is, how do we communicate as those changes go on so that we can remain committed, supportive, accountable, affirming as we each are going through the normal changes of life. We talked before we came on the air about. You have this idea of living to 106, and I have the idea of living to 105, and our reasons are different. But the fact that we still have a lot of years ahead of us means that nothing is going to be the same 10 years from now, or
Oh,
year 30, and in your case, 50 years from now.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so the
Well,
how do we
I
change?
love what you said. Go finish it. Finish your thought.
The question is, how do we change without losing the values that define who we are? I think
Mm.
that's the big challenge that we really.
What is Go back to your relationship point, because I want to use a
Yeah,
concrete example of that, the very broad. How do we grow and keep consistent with our value system? What is a marriage, right? What is a relationship? How can both of the parties in the relationship, and we'll do the marriage one, we can talk about friendship too, but let's do marriage. How do both of us allow for growth and change, sometimes subtle, sometimes radical change, right? But how do
right.
we do that and still preserve preserve the values or the goodnesses, the things that we want to have out of the marriage. Because if the things that we have in the marriage are very like, oh, it's this and it's this and it's this, and it's very fixed and very cut and dry, right? It's almost impossible to imagine that those fixed and cut and dry things are not going to get shaken up, tossed around a little bit if both participants in the marriage are changing and growing, right?
Right.
I want to make this a little bit sad, right? I won't go too far, but I think, like you said, right? How do we allow our partners to change, and how do we change in the relationship, right? My greatest betrayal to my ex-wife, because we did have a wonderful marriage and we made these beautiful daughters, and I'm so glad, I'm so grateful to her, and to them, right? But my greatest betrayal was not that I resigned from my job and stopped making gazillions of dollars as a portfolio manager. That wasn't she didn't like that very much, right? I didn't sleep with my secretary. I didn't even buy a red sports car, right? I didn't do any of those sort of midlife crisisy things. What I did do was, and I didn't know I was doing it at the time, but I changed the terms of our relationship. I changed the terms of the deal, and I did it on the fly,
Yeah.
right? Because we were childhood friends, not necessarily childhood sweethearts. We went together in seventh grade. Before you go out, I don't know if you're in the Midwest, we go together, right? So we wrote notes to each other, right? But so we weren't really childhood sweethearts, but we got together very soon after university. She went to a different school, I went to a different school. And but for 20 years, from age 25 to 45, we both of us participated. Maybe it was a myth, maybe it was true, right? It's hard to say, right? But we participated in this and telling ourselves a story that we're high achievers, and we're world shakers at work, and we were, right? We made tons of money and had lots of success, externally measured success. And we had wonderful daughters and wonderful friends. And then we moved to England, and then we have this wonderful international life, and we jet set all over the world, right? But right around age 45, or really 47, I said, do we want to look at how this all works? Because, we're getting on 22 years of marriage. Do we want to do the next 22 years exactly the same way that we did the first 22? That's what and now I'd love to tell you that it was that clean and simple. But I was saying, is it okay to ask questions about what our SOP is? What's the standard operating procedure? Is it okay to ask questions about that? And unfortunately, it was not okay, because to ask the question was, I didn't know it, and I'm sure she was correct, but to ask the question was to say, I think we should probably change the SOP, right? Well,
You were opening up that question for that to be discussed of what you were doing.
Yeah. And I will tell you, it's despite a good 4 years of probably some grudging psychotherapeutic work, but less grudging as time goes on. But I still am uncomfortable, right? This is quite hilarious, because in my profession now, whether I'm a coach or an advisor or just a I mean, I'm not a gadfly, I'm not a Socratean gadfly, but I'm a listener, right? I'm a listener. Like, what I do ask questions. I ask questions, but the questions, what do you want to have happen, right? What are our intentions? What are the client's intentions? What are the we don't. But what's really ironic is that I'm still uncomfortable with the absolute, the liturgy of both the coaching world and the therapeutic world, which is, can we hold space? Can we hold space, right? At least today, when I say that, I know what the words mean. But if you'd said that to me 4 years ago, of course I'd know what the words mean. I scored very highly on my SAT vocab section. But if you said it to me 4 years ago, I'd smile. Of course I'd smile, because I can't ever admit that I don't have the first effing clue what you're talking about, right? But I didn't know, how do you hold space for someone? Because it isn't a physical act. You can't, I can't pick up the space and hold it for you. Here's your space, right?
Yeah.
And that drove me crazy, right? Because it was like, and my slightly decreasing, it's getting better, but my incrementally decreasing discomfort with the idea of holding space is exactly as you said, allowing for the possibility of opening up new ways of looking at things and new ways of doing things.
Several years ago, I have a program called Impact Day, and it's a process of clarifying problem or a purpose or whatever it may be. And so I was taking a friend of mine through the process. We were spending a day together, and at some point during that day, this is 2 or 3 hours into the session, I said, it's really important that we have the ability to say no, because in doing so, we're affirming a yes. And so out of that came a little short book that I wrote called May Your No Be a Yes. And in that book, I as it turned out, I chose to describe two marriages as a way that where that in one case it failed, in the other case it succeeded. And I think it's because of the way you were just talking. Let me give you the quick and dirty. So it's a couple.
Take your time. Take your time.
Quick and dirty. The first couple, they meet in college. They fall in love. They both believe in marriage, and they get married. And then they begin to fall apart without any conversation over it, as he sees marriage as a asset for him in his business life, and she begins to take the attitude that the marriage and the family, this is after they have children, that marriage and the family is the preeminent value, and everything else should be subordinate to it, including his job. And at some point she reaches the point where she sees him as unworthy of him as a husband and as a father, and he realizes that he's in an untenable situation that's going to harm him. So they part, and so the divorce happens pretty quickly once they recognize that they both believe in marriage, but they don't believe in the same kind of marriage.
Yep.
Other couple, they marry out of college. They both go on the fast track in the business world. He's traveling, he's making a lot of money, she's making a lot of money. They're both corporate giants, so to speak. They have really nice cars, and they have a big house. And then they come to the point where they decide, well, it's time to start having children. And they recognize that they have put themselves in a position where they are not able to do children and maintain their lifestyle. And so they have to decide they're going to sacrifice, in many cases, the luxurious lifestyle that they had established. And so he quits his job. He's no longer traveling. He buys a local business. She becomes a executive coach. She stays at home. They end up with 4 children and 15. And so they're constantly renegotiating their SOP all the time.
Yes.
And in 15 years later, they have 2 girls and 2 boys. The boys are twins. The girls are a sophomore and a freshman, and the boys are 7th graders. And the 2 girls find themselves in a situation where they're having to travel each week. One is a soccer player, the other is a singer, and they're going to competitions. And so one of the parents is having to go with each one of the girls. And then they got these 2 boys. Fortunately, the grandparents live there, and the grandparents are glad to have the boys and so they're constantly having to negotiate what is in the best interest of the family, what is in the best interest of the children, what is in the best interest of our marriage. And it's never settled, it's never fixed, it's constantly moving. But the fact that they are in agreement that this is our standard operating procedure, which is we're going to constantly be evaluating where we are so that we can preserve the marriage as something that is sacred to us. And it's in writing that, it was a kind of one of those moments of kind of imagining, well, if we took this and put it in other context, it would be in a similar way, or constantly evaluating whether the values that we hold are sustainable. Are they worthy of sacrifice? Do I need to quit something in order for these values to remain important to me? All those kinds of things kind of emerged from that whole process of writing the book.
I what I love is it connects with so many of the things that we were going on with before, and I'll just pick one, which is that whole, the fixed or the fixed or the malleable, the fixed or the growth mindset, right?
Right.
Is marriage this thing that you can write down on a contract, right? You write down, I'm sorry, I don't want to get into religious discussion, but you can inscribe the words on a piece of stone, and
Right.
that's it. It's fixed. Or is the marriage a living, breathing thing,
Right.
right? Which not only you can sort of, we can suffer to adjust it, like I don't want to, but I can deal with adjusting it from time to time. Or do we recognize it's a living, breathing thing that actually desires adjustment and needs adjustment, because if it doesn't get adjusted, its clothes, it will grow out of its clothes,
Right.
right? It
Right.
needs a new uniform, from year to year, right? And even if it doesn't grow, the uniform gets threadbare, right? It gets old and it gets worn. But uh, I love your story, because, as you can tell, I am not a person who dislikes communication, right? Like, the basis of that second marriage, of marriage two, is that they knew it's going to require negotiation, and we're not only are we going to grudgingly update our SOP, we're going to have fixed meetings. We're going to actually have scheduled meetings where we say, okay,
Right.
how's it all working, right? And if we need to, we'll have ad hoc meetings as well. Like, oh darn, right? What we thought 2 months ago, that's not working, right? But the question is, when you're checking and correcting, like check and correct, do you have, as exactly as you said, Ed, do you have at least similar enough directions? Are my goals in the marriage similar enough to my partner's goals, that when we're checking and correcting, we're correcting not in exactly the same direction? It doesn't have to be exactly that way, right? But are we correcting in a similar enough direction that it's workable, right? That it's workable. But yeah, I can tell you, right? One of the, you know, prior to the point where John wanted to start asking questions, right? Prior to the point, I have to say, I prized the fact that we weren't asking questions, right? I loved the fact that we weren't having to, please, let's not reanalyze the terms of the deal, right? Only when I thought, wait a second, could we reanalyze the terms of the deal? Did my spouse's, which is a constant trait for her, my ex-wife, right? Her extreme dislike of, looking at stuff and talking about it, right? For the longest time, that was wonderful. And
Right.
then it just wasn't wonderful when I said, hey, could we look at this and maybe talk about it? She didn't change. I did, because I said, I wonder if we could look at this and talk about it. But yeah, I do think there's no way is better, right? And if you and I could communicate, if we could thrash out our differences telepathically, right? If we could just do it, if we could have a conversation like this, Ed, ready?
It wouldn't work.
Right? Well, yeah, but I mean,
I mean, yeah.
right, do it without words, but what for me is non-negotiable is that the negotiation has to happen, right? I don't care if we do it in Morse code or if we use Braille symbols or whatever, but for me, there has to be some communication, because without communication, I can't tell if the adjustments, let's go back to our imagined backpacking trip that you and I are on together. If we can't communicate, I can't tell if you want to go to Istanbul or not. I'm like, hey, we're only 50 miles from Istanbul. It's only going to take us 3 days of hiking to get there. It's going to be good hikes. That'll be strenuous, but did you want to go to what used to be called Constantinople? And you're like, oh yeah, John, that'd be great. I want to see the Hagia Sophia. I've got to see the biggest church dome in the world, right? Or you go, no, I don't know. But the communication has to be there. So I will say this, right? You were saying that what the learning in your story was, how can this be applied to other settings, whether they be business settings or government settings or community or church or family or whatever, right? And the lesson for, my practice, my business right now, is that exactly what you're talking about. If a marriage contract, right, if the terms of the marriage contract not only ought to be, right, not only sort of, it's a good practice, check your tires every so often, right? You got to check the tires on the marriage, right? But it's the same thing in a corporation. There's an agreement between what does the company do for its workers and what do the workers do for the company, right? What is the responsibility of the executives to the employees, but also the executives to the shareholders, or the executives to, oh my goodness, the environment. What is the what are the terms of the deal? What does the environment get? What does the company get? What is the community in which the company operates? What do they get? Like, all of those things. There are no right answers. There's no perfect answer. Like Plato, I've read Plato's Republic, right? Plato does not opine on stakeholder rights. There's nothing in there about stakeholder rights. But that doesn't mean that there aren't better and worser. It's my favorite ungrammatical thing. There aren't betterer and worser ways to think about how we negotiate the contract. I know I'm talking to a Presbyterian, Methodist, Presbyterian?
Presbyterian, yeah.
I'm talking to a Presbyterian minister. How do we negotiate the living, breathing covenant between employees of a company and the company itself, between the employees and the shareholders, the company and the shareholders, the company and the communities, the company and the government, the laws, everything else? How do we negotiate that living, breathing covenant? All right, because even though it has to be renegotiated, at any point, you don't want to do it every week. You don't want to do it every Friday.
But it requires ongoing, constant conversation and reflection upon what are the values that define us as a married couple, or define us as a family, or define us as a business, or define us as a business unit. And that the person who is responsible, who is at the top of the performance hierarchy, is really the one responsible for maintaining that conversation about values. Because if the people do not accept those values, then they will not respect that person as the leader, or they will not respect that spouse as the co-leader of the family. And this is what I mean, this is not a new thing to me, but this is becoming more and more clear to me that values are the foundation, and that we must talk about them all the time, and that leaders should be talking about, these are the values that define us as a group, and then this is the basis of our respect for one another, and therefore how we learn to trust one another. And what I see in many relationships of all types is that lack of respect and that lack of trust, because they have some kind of notion that there's a transaction, that I'm going to be married to this person because I'm going to get something from her, or we're going to work together to gain something together. When I think it goes much deeper than that, and it is an interesting. It's an interesting.
Well, I'm gonna share one of my favorite. I'm actually gonna claim a little bit of ownership on this, and I'm gonna share one of my favorite relationship tips. And I have to tell you and whoever's listening to this is not very battle tested, right? This is a new one. But despite the fact that maybe because of the fact that Vicky and I are pretty deeply in love with each other, and and we care really deeply about each other, we still have conflict. Like, we have conflict. Oftentimes we have conflict about really silly things, about, like, where does the bookcase go? Right? We've just moved into a new house, right? Which art hangs where? You can see nothing over on this wall yet because we're still discussing which art hangs where. And sometimes whether the conflicts are about what seems to be a very trivial thing, like where to hang a certain painting, or where to put the upright piano, or it's about a really significant thing about relationships, or how we what to do with aging parents, or where we go, right? When those conflicts rise to the point that one or both of us are triggered beyond our ability to remain present, right? I don't need to get critical and say, oh, you're so angry, or you're so hyperactivated, or you're unreasonable. But when we can't stay in the conversation, we're getting better at taking a time out. Let's take a time out. But this is a favor that I've asked Vicky, but I said, can you just say TTOIG? TTOIG. You know what TTO stands for, because it's a temporary timeout. It's only temporary, but that's the important, that first T, temporary timeout. IG says infinite game. Temporary timeout from an infinite game, right? I'm leaving this discussion. I'm getting up and walking out of this room because we're just tearing strips of flesh out of each other at this point. It's happily metaphoric, conversational strips of flesh. But
Right.
I'm getting out and walking out. I'm walking out of the room, but I'm not walking out of the relationship. It's an infinite game, right? I'll be back, but I'll be back when I have cooled off. I'm not saying, oh, I'll be back when you've cooled off. I'll be back when when I can re-engage in a
I like that.
hopefully.
I
Yeah.
like that very
But so
much.
T-toig, right?
Yeah.
And I just said, Vicky, you don't have to say T-toig because I think she's like, that's just a stupid sound, right? But just go like this. Just give me the universal timeout symbol, right? And sometimes I'll accept it, and sometimes I'll go, can't keep talking, right? Oh, please, do we need it? Right? But time out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see that. That's great. I think that's a good discipline that couples and teams can practice. And usually if it's a team, it's someone in that group has decided to um, put their own benefit or own welfare ahead of everyone else, and they become very destructive of the culture of respect and trust. And at that point, you have to go take a time out.
Yeah, you need a timeout, and right, exactly. You say the ego gets unconstrained, right? That that person's ego. It's like I have to preserve my view, my opinion, whatever it is, and devil take the hindmost, right?
Right.
I want to make sure that we didn't lose the gist of your last point. I was pretty excited about the T-toig, but right before we got to T-toig, you were talking about how leaders have to have open discussions about the values of the organization. They have to, right?
Well,
And whether it's a 1 point leader, or I really like, let's get our organizations, like get away from hierarchy and get as close to horizontal as we can. But obviously you need leadership. The thing that I wanted to add is leaders not only have to talk about the values, they have to be open, right? The leader has to model openness and vulnerability about those values, because unless you can, if I'm your boss, right? No, you're my boss, I don't care which we go, but unless you can say, here's the values of the firm, and I can say to you, I don't think the way we're marketing our major product upholds that value. Unless I can say that to you and you can say, really? Really tell me more about that. Unless the leader makes it clear that they are open to, interpreting, to renegotiating, to always trying to improve and deepen and more fully understand how those values manifest themselves in our behavior and our sales practices and everything else, then all the employees of the organization, unfortunately, I'm going to use some colorful language, will know that leadership team is full of shit.
yeah. I learned this when I took over my son's Boy Scout troop, became the Scoutmaster. And I had, in the first 2 years, we had an influx. We went from 12 boys to 48 boys in the troop.
Well, you did something right.
Or wrong. And but one of the things that happened was there was a couple, a guy, a son and a father that joined. And the son came in, he was older and he had already had his Eagle rank, and his father had was a retired corporate guy, and he took over the chairmanship of the troop committee. And it wasn't long after they had joined, 2 or 3 months when this took place. So we come in to have our monthly meeting, and he wants to promote the idea of making a change in the policy where only an Eagle rank boy can be the senior patrol leader. Well, at that point in time, his son was the only one, and his son was never going to be elected because he never built any relationships. So I said to them, I said to the committee, you're free, because I'm not a voting member of the committee. You're free to do whatever you want to, but I can tell you, if you vote to approve this, I will resign tonight. And I said, the reason is that this violates the values of this troop. And at this point, I had never articulated this, but we've been living this. So I said, the 5 values are: every boy is going to learn leadership, every boy is going to advance. Every boy is going to have fun. We're going to teach leadership through the camping program, and we're all going to wear our uniforms for strength and honor and unity as a troop. These are the five values or five principles we're operating on. So you can adopt those or you can adopt this, but they can't be together. They can't work together.
Right.
So they adopted the five values, and this guy and his son ended up leaving the troop. And what I learned to do almost immediately was I said something about those five values every week, and
So they became part of the water and the air.
Not only that, it became the rationale for how we made decisions.
Yeah.
And so we looked at the boys, and in evaluating them, we had like 35 boys at this point, and we evaluate them and say, are they advancing and are they having fun? If they're advancing but not having fun, then someone's putting pressure on them. If they're not advancing but they're having fun, it means there's a lazy streak that we need to address. We want them to do both.
They're
shorthand for measurement. Yeah. And at some point, a couple of years later, one of the couples in the troop went around me to ask the troop to participate in a program that they were starting, and I had no knowledge of it. And this comes to me because I was not on the email list, and so the question is, how does this work with these values? Well, the year later, we had adopted these five values for all the adults as well. So we expected them to all lead, expected them to advance in leadership knowledge and in having fun and wearing uniform, all of that. And so I went to the committee and I said, this is what's going on. I'm going to suspend them from all activities indefinitely until they come to me and explain the reasons and apologize. And they agreed. And so I sent them an email saying, because of this is the status, your status until you come to me and explain yourself. The problem was that their son was the senior patrol leader. And so this was Monday and Tuesday. Thursday we meet. I bring all my adult leaders, which are 19 men, mostly men, together, and I'd say, this is what's transpired this week. And they said, well, we've been waiting for you to do something to this couple because they've been trying to undermine you for quite some time. I said, well, I didn't know. You should have told me. I said, well, but this is what we're doing. They said, okay, now that you've done this, how can we help you? What do you need us to do? So the unity of the troop was there because the values of the troop were practiced and lived out and affirmed every week. And that was, almost 20 years ago when all that took place. And I left the troop in 2009, and they're still operating but according to those five principles today. And so the idea of having values which become the thing that defines who we are, they're our identity, I think has real value. And the trick is how do we bring that into the more social relationships of like family and marriage, and it's the challenge.
Even friends. But I love that you did it with the Boy Scout troop, because I was going to say, that practice, the practice of having both a regular, scheduled reanalysis of our covenant, right? Of our book of values, as well as the opportunity for at any point to have an ad hoc one, right? It's just the Toyota method, right? The Toyota method, when you're building cars, any person on the production line can pull the lever and stop the production line, right? Your five values, where anyone can say, hold on a second.
That's right.
We're not, but it does get to be, I'm not trying to be right. It gets, as you said, I said, it's like in the air and the water. And you said, even more than the air and the water, it becomes our decision framework. It becomes our rubric for making decisions, and I'm not saying that these decisions are ever easy, but use your last example where all your guys said, oh, we've been waiting for you to do something about this, right? it was actually for them, it was an easy decision. They're like, we were wondering when you were going to do this. And as soon as you did, they said, all right, how can we help? Right. It's not that it wasn't easy, because if it were easy enough, all of them would have said to the couple, they would have said, hey guys, knock it off.
and that
Right.
was the
So it
real
wasn't,
payoff. That was the real payoff, is when they said, okay, we're totally with you. We're gonna get through this together.
right. Right. And that actually, how is that for a beautiful, like I'm looking at our time. We don't have to end, but I'm like, how is that for a very beautiful tie all the way back to the beginning of our discussion? They said, how can we help you? But we're going to get through this. That comes right back to what we're talking about, either sort of the financial crisis-y feeling like I'm just waiting for things to get back to normal, right? Their position is a kind of mirror opposite to the things are, everything's up in the air, it's all unsettled, I'm going to wait for it to settle again. They were saying, we know it will settle, it's going to be okay. We appreciate you are acting, you're taking action, you're taking direction. We like the direction you're going in because it fits with these already articulated and understood and absorbed values. How can we help? Because we know we're going to get through this.
And there's
We
one
maybe made it really simple there.
There's one more
Yeah.
piece to say about this. And this is maybe the reason why this is not practiced more, is because when you elevate your values to the point where they define who you are, you're accountable to your values. And people don't want to be accountable to anything, particularly people who are in power and who have leverage. They don't want to be accountable to anything. So they don't want values to be a part of the picture, because they become,
the values will tie them down. The values will tie them down because the values are externally observable, right? And if heaven forbid, if you've got up to the board, if you've got up at the annual shareholder meeting, you've said, these are our 3 core values. And now all of a sudden, the action I'm taking, because, it gets me more stock options or, whatever it does, right? It feathers my nest. There's no way to dance around that.
right.
Yeah. But I like it. I think, though, to your point, your troop leaders, the adult troop leaders that you were talking about, right? When they said, we know we're going to get through this, right? That, I feel like, is the other side of the coin of, I'm just going to wait for everything to settle down before we do anything.
That's exactly right. This is cool stuff. I mean, this is not just life. No, this is life abundant and fulfilling, because all of a sudden you see the pathway. That pathway is not in carrying all this stuff with you. The pathway is in recognizing the opportunity that is present in every situation for those values to define the path that you're going to take.
I think I'm going to stretch your metaphor, and I apologize. I don't think this is really good. I'm going to self-deprecate to start with this. That maybe that makes the hurt a little. That makes the hurt a little easier for me to get over. What you've done, though, is you said, in our backpacking metaphor, our backpacking story. What you just said, if those your 5 troop values, for example, right? Those values are what shape the backpack, such that if you're living according to those values, you'll know, like, those values, that backpack is only going to fit things that fit with those values, right?
Right.
Your values are your backpack, because I can't put anything in to that backpack that doesn't fit with the values, right? Which means, and I know it's not an infinite, it's not a magical Dungeons and Dragons backpack where you can put infinite amounts into it, right? It's not a bag of holding, right? It's a backpack, but it can hold all the things that we need to have it hold, because it can hold everything that is consistent with our values.
And it's not burdensome. So it's, it's not burdensome. I think that's the thing which people feel when they hear people begin to talk about values, this is heavy because I have to adopt these values. But if these values are already present in the way they live, then it's not burdensome. It's free. It's really liberating. It's freedom. And
I think this can be my last word for the conversation, and that is, a lot in the organizations that we work with, right? A discussion like this can be pretty unsettling. when
Oh
we
yeah.
say what you really want to do is you really want to figure out what your values are, and then sadly, sorry, then you kind of have to live by them too. That is a frightening way to talk about it. It's slightly less frightening, and my colleagues are better at this than I am, but it's slightly less frightening when you say whether or not you are having regular airing sessions to talk about your values, whether or not you're doing that, you have values, right? You got them, right?
That's
You're
really
not talking
true.
about them. And because you're not talking about them, let's take a perfectly random walk. Let's get Burton Mulkey, or let's get John Bogle at Vanguard on this, right? In a perfectly random world, because you're not talking about your values, you've got sort of, X percentage chance that your values are good and that they're the things you want, and that they're communicating to your team and to your people and your customers. They're communicating. Like, it might happen, but you could have really awful ones, right? Because you're not looking. You're not looking, you're not talking about it. But even though what we'd like to believe, and this is the kind of the holding on for dear life, I'm just going to wait for things to settle, then I can look at my values, right? Just because you're not looking and talking about them doesn't mean that you don't have them. And every day that you don't do the exercise to let them emerge, to give them air and talk about them, increases the chances that the values you are living by are not the ones that you want to be living by. Right. But that's a little, and now I've already made that threatening again. I'm like, oh, there's like but my colleagues are better at this, but they'll say, don't kid yourselves, kiddo, don't kid yourself, right? Whether you think about them or not, they're there. Right.
John, there are many people that when they reach their 40s begin to think like you did about making a change. They feel that they're in transition. And one of the things that I have found when they reach that, I call that's really the second of three transitions. First is from childhood to adulthood, when you get your first job.
Yeah.
And then you go through this transition when you're in your 40s. And what you realize is that in some people, I think, realize that what has happened is that the company's values have become their values. They've incorporated them into their value system. And so if they're going to make a change, they don't really know who they are. So they have to start over in the sense of acquiring an awareness of what the values are that truly mean something to them. Then the third transition is when you retire and you go into your third half of your life, as I am now. So I think all of this is really important. I think it's really valuable. I'm really glad that we've had this conversation. I mean, we didn't know where we were going to take this, but this has been an extraordinarily important conversation, I think, for a lot of people. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for who you are, because you're in tune with this, and that's really important. And I'm glad that you are, because I think it will make your next 50 years really significant in terms of what you do, but also the effect that you're going to have on people and the places that you live and work.
I'm only not tearing up because that was beautiful, and I felt the beginning of mist, but I'm only not tearing up because I just got a call from Vicky. I got to check in with her. She's in New York City tonight, so I'm already moving on to the next thing. But before I do that, Ed, I want to say thank you so much, not just for the opportunity here. Thank you so much to do this, but thank you so much for that wrap up. That was beautiful, and I will return the compliment with this, Ed. All right, I hear you, and I hope that I live up to I think your prophecy is a good prophecy, right? I'm gonna make real and sincere and humble, yes, but significant contribution. But I will tell you this, my friend, I will be happier in making that contribution if you and I can be holding hands while we do it.
I would like that as well. I'm
All
with
right.
you.
I would like to be
Okay.
arm in arm with Ed Breniger.
Let's do that. Thank you, John. And thank you, everyone, for watching the Eddie Network podcast. Hit the like button, subscribe, but offer a comment. I think, when you comment, you're practicing an interaction with us, and I think that's really valuable. So do that, and we will certainly respond to you. So thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye-bye.